right, welcome to a deep dive into Heart of Darkness. I know you're ready to really get into this book, and we're going to go right to the source, excerpts from the book to really just uncover it.
Okay.
So this is a story about this sailor, Marlow, right? And he travels up the Congo River, and he works for this Belgian trading company, and he becomes obsessed with this guy named Kurtz. But it's way more than just an adventure story. It really dives into colonialism, greed, and good and evil, So are you ready to explore this?
Absolutely. And what makes this exploration so interesting is just how Conrad throws us right into it. We're experiencing it all through Marlow's words as he tells his journey to his friend on this ship on the Thames. And even though he's speaking from what seems like a civilized setting, he draws a really chilling parallel. He compares his journey to the Romans arriving in Britain centuries earlier. He sensed this darkness in the Congo that has endured through time.
Yeah, there's this immediate sense of foreboding, right? Even before Marlow gets there, he's already carrying this weight of the Congo with him. And then, the company he's working for, this trading company, I'm already getting a bad feeling about these guys.
Yeah, and for good reason. Right away, Marlow is seeing the brutal reality of colonialism. Conrad doesn't shy away from showing just the awful treatment of the native laborers. The cruelty, the pointless violence. It's a complete contrast to the supposed civilizing mission that the Europeans had. One detail that really struck me was the story of Friesleven.
Yeah.
The captain before Marlow.
Oh, yeah. The guy that was killed.
Yeah.
Over two hands. Right? It's almost absurdly tragic, You have this supposedly gentle European, and then he's driven to violence over something so trivial.
Exactly. And it really shows just the dehumanizing effects of colonialism, how it just distorts people's perceptions and makes them justify the unjustifiable. Friesleven's story really foreshadows the darkness that's to come, and shows the real cost of the ivory trade. It isn't just about the ivory itself.
Right. It's not just about hens or ivory. What does ivory represent in this story then?
Well, ivory becomes the symbol of greed and exploitation. And ultimately, this hollowness of ambition, it drives men to madness, literally in Kurtz's case. It shows this insatiable hunger for wealth and power that fuels colonialism. And speaking of Kurtz, the further Marlow travels up the river, the more he hears about this guy.
Yeah, Kurtz is he's like a ghost that haunts the whole story. He's this larger-than-life figure, spoken about in hushed tones, both revered and feared. You get this sense that he embodies both brilliance, but also something much darker. It's almost like the river is leading Marlow to this inevitable encounter with Kurtz.
That's a great point. The river becomes more than just a setting. It's like a metaphor for Marlow's journey into darkness. As the jungle gets denser and the journey is harder, Marlow's sense of unease and the mystery of Kurtz intensifies. It's like the river's pulling him deeper into the heart of the Congo, and also the heart of himself. He even finds this nautical textbook that has these weird annotations and ciphers. This odd detail adds to this growing sense of dread and mystery.
Okay, so the river is this path to Kurtz, and to Marlow confronting something inside himself, right? But what's pushing Kurtz to these extremes? Is it just greed?
Well, to understand Kurtz, we need to understand the history. King Leopold II of Belgium, he ruled the Congo as his own personal property. He was driven by this ruthless need for power and wealth. The atrocities committed during his rule were insane. Millions of Congolese people died from forced labor, mutilations, and disease. This brutal system that Kurtz operates in really shapes his descent into darkness.
It's like Kurtz is a product of this system, but also someone that takes it to the most extreme conclusion. So what happens when Marlow actually gets close to this guy? Does he get the answers he's looking for?
Well, the journey takes a crazy turn when the steamer is suddenly attacked by natives. It's this chaotic, scary scene. It's all foggy and you can hear the jungle. And it forces Marlow to do something drastic. He runs the steamer aground, which kills his helmsman, just to escape.
Wow, so this journey is not only bringing Marlow closer to Kurtz, but it's also forcing him into these morally ambiguous situations.
Exactly. The attack blurs the lines between civilized and savage, and it makes us question who's really in control and what the true cost of colonialism is. It also makes the tension higher, leading to that moment. When they arrive at Kurtz's compound and what Marlow finds there, it's probably the most shocking image in the novel.
The heads on stakes. I can't get that image out of my head. What was Conrad trying to say with that?
Yeah. Those heads are a symbol of the consequences of Kurtz's ambitions. They show the real cost of his pursuit of power and wealth, the dehumanizing effects of colonialism taken to the extreme. But even with all this brutality, Marlowe's reaction to Kurtz is complex.
That's what I find so fascinating. Even with this horrific scene, Marlowe is still drawn to Kurtz.
Disgusted, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But also fascinated, maybe even sympathetic.
That's Conrad's skill as a writer. He doesn't make Kurtz a simple villain. He shows us glimpses of his brilliance, his charisma, this tragic fall from grace. Even when the Russian trader arrives, this guy practically worships Kurtz. It adds to this complex picture of him. And then there's the native woman, Kurtz's lover. She embodies both Kurtz's power and his destructive influence.
Hold on. The native woman. I thought she was a powerful figure but didn't say much. What's her role in all of this? Yeah, she's hard to categorize. She represents both the beauty and danger of the Congo. Her silence says a lot. It makes us think about the perspectives that are silenced in these colonial stories. She reminds us that there are many sides to every story, and that the colonial perspective often hides the experiences of the colonized people. She adds another layer of moral ambiguity.
Okay, so we have this Kurtz, who's hard to pin down morally, this brutal system. And Marlowe, who's dealing with his own role in this. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of this darkness. Where do we go from here?
Things get really bad for Kurtz. Like, his health, both mental and physical, just deteriorates. And as they're going back down the river, he says those famous words, the horror. The horror.
Those words are, I don't know, they've stuck with me. They feel like they contain everything, the brutality, the greed, the darkness. What do you think Kurtz meant when he said that?
Well, that's what's so great about Conrad, right? He leaves it up to us to decide. Was Kurtz talking about the horrors he's seen and taken part in? Or was he talking about his own soul, recognizing how bad he'd become? Or was he talking about colonialism as a whole? Like, was he saying that the whole system is evil? It's a question that haunts readers. Maybe it's meant to.
Even after he dies, Kurtz still has an impact. Marlowe decides to protect Kurtz's image, at least for his fiancée, by lying about his last words.
Such a tough question, ethically. Is Marlowe just being nice, trying to preserve who Kurtz used to be? Or is he making Kurtz into something he wasn't? Is he protecting Kurtz from having to be accountable? Does that make Marlowe part of the darkness, too?
You know, it's interesting. Marlowe seems to be wrestling with his own part in all of this. Throughout his story, he keeps going back, questioning his memories, almost like he's trying to make sense of not just Kurtz's actions, but his own reactions to them.
You're right. Marlowe's journey isn't just going up the Congo River. It's also a journey of figuring himself out, confronting his own potential for darkness. He has to admit that people are complicated. The line between good and evil isn't always clear. And by telling his story, he's inviting us to confront that same complexity in ourselves. He's not giving easy answers. He's making us really think about what we've seen.
Yeah. It's crazy how this story is from the late 1800s, but it still feels so relevant now. We're still dealing with the effects of colonialism, the exploitation of resources, the struggle to understand and overcome these darker parts of ourselves.
That's the thing about great books, They go beyond time and place. They talk about things that are true for everyone, everywhere. Heart of Darkness warns us that we all have the potential for darkness inside us. But it also tells us to look at the ways we're involved in systems of oppression, to see injustice and stand up to it, to remember that everyone is human.
And it makes me think about stories themselves. Marlowe was obsessed with Kurtz, partly because Kurtz was such a good storyteller. He could weave these tales that pulled people in. But in the end, it's Marlowe who controls the story. He decides how we see Kurtz and everything that happens.
That's so important. Heart of Darkness isn't just about what happens. It's about how we tell those stories. Conrad uses this frame narrative. Marlowe is telling this to a group of people. And that makes us wonder if we can trust Marlowe, to think about how his point of view changes how we understand everything.
So it's not just about reading passively. We have to actively think about it, question it, and decide what it means to us.
Exactly. Conrad is challenging us to be critical readers, to not just believe what we're told, to think about different sides. Remember, history is often written by the winners. And there are always other voices, other stories that haven't been heard.
Okay, we talked about Kurtz, about Marlowe, the history of colonialism. But I want to go back to those severed heads. They're such a strong image. What do you think they say about how colonialism affects people's minds, both the colonizers and the colonized?
The heads on stakes. They show how people are stripped of who they are, their identity. They become objects, things to be used. For Kurtz, they're trophies, signs of his power. But for the Congolese people, they mean terror, loss, the destruction of their culture and their way of life. They show what it does to you to have that power and what it does to you to be under that power.
For Marlowe, seeing that must have been so disturbing, like a sign that Kurtz had become a savage.
Absolutely. But it also made Marlowe face his own darkness. to see that everyone, even supposedly civilized people,
Hmm.
are capable of being savage. And that's a really disturbing thought.
It makes you think about the title, right? Heart of Darkness. Is the darkness just in the Congo, in people like Kurtz? Or is it something bigger? A darkness in everyone's heart?
That's a question that gets to the core of the book, I think. Conrad doesn't give us a simple answer. He's saying darkness is complicated. It's inside us and outside us. It's personal and it's societal. It can be seen in violence and exploitation, but also in the subtle ways we treat each other like they're less than human, the compromises we make, the choices we make when things are hard.
So Heart of Darkness isn't just about colonialism. It's about what it means to be human.
Right. It's about the possibility for both good and evil that we all have, the choices we make when we're facing those forces, and how systems like colonialism can change how we see the world, mess up our sense of right and wrong, and bring out the worst in us.
This has been a great discussion. I'm sure our listeners are realizing that Heart of Darkness is so much more than just an adventure story. It's a book that challenges us in so many ways and makes us face some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world. We've been to the heart of colonialism and explored these complex characters, Marlow and Kurtz, and really gotten into these questions Conrad asks about human nature. It feels like Heart of Darkness is like a warning, that darkness can consume us all.
Yeah. But I think it's also a challenge to face the darkness, really understand it, and come out of that with a better understanding of ourselves and the world.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's not just about avoiding the darkness, but about going through it and wrestling with it, and maybe even finding something meaningful.
Right. And I think that's what makes Heart of Darkness so powerful. It doesn't give us easy answers. It forces us to deal with ambiguity, with things that don't make sense, with truths that are hard to face, truths that other stories usually ignore.
And I'm thinking about you. You have this meeting coming up about colonialism in literature. It's going to be a really tough topic. What parts of our deep dive into Heart of Darkness do you think will be helpful for you?
Well, I think the biggest thing is critical engagement. Heart of Darkness shows us that we can't just accept the usual stories we're told about history or literature. We need to look closer, question what we think we know, consider different points of view, and be okay with not having all the answers.
It's like Conrad is giving us tools to break down not just this book, but any writing that deals with colonialism, power, the human condition.
Exactly. He's showing us how to read between the lines, to notice what's not said, to question the characters and even the author. Those skills are so important for anyone that really wants to understand literature.
And for your meeting, it's about using those skills. In the larger conversation about colonialism, you'll be ready to look deeper, challenge what people usually think, and share insights that go beyond just summaries.
Definitely. Heart of Darkness has given me a way to understand how complicated colonialism is, how it affects people's minds, both the colonizers and the colonized, and the questions it raises about what it means to be human. It's a book that will stay with me.
And that's what makes a book truly great, isn't it? It stays with you, makes you think, makes you see things differently, even after you've read it a few times.
I agree. It shows how brilliant Conrad was, that Heart of Darkness is still relevant and makes us think, even though it was written over 100 years ago.
So as you go into your meeting, remember what we talked about, embrace the complexity, question the narratives, and don't forget the human stories at the heart of it all.
Thank you for taking me through this. I feel so much more ready to talk about these important issues.
And thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Heart of Darkness. We hope it was insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even made you a little uncomfortable. Remember, this is just the beginning. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep looking for those deeper truths that are hidden all around us.